Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Today we will be learning Parshat Pinchas. So our first insight will be about the tribe of Shimon and the tribe of Levy. Here we see that this is a continuation from the end of Parshat Balak. At the end of Parshat Balak, if everyone remembers, Bilam is unsuccessful in cursing the Jews. He sends instead, his advice to Balak is get Israel to sin, and that will lead to a curse for them. And so the daughters of Moab and Midian, they come, they entice the men to idol worship, to an orgy. Scene is out of hand, and Pinchas reminds Moshe what the halacha is in a case where, this is what we're going to learn, that Zimri and Cosbi. Zimri is the prince of the tribe of Shimon. Cosbi is the daughter of the king of Moab. And he kills them. In other words, in that particular instance where they publicly had relations, that the halacha at that time was that you didn't need a whole court case, that it was a death sentence. Pinchas kills him, he stops the plague stops. In the beginning of this parsha, he's rewarded with a Brit Shalom, a covenant of peace. That we're not going to go into. Everyone who has Orchard of Delights, there's a whole article about the meaning of this covenant of peace. Here, we want to look at the verse that says, it's chapter 25, verse Yud Dalet. It says, V'shem ish Yisrael hamukeh asher hukah et hamidyanit Zimri ben Salu nasi beit av l'Shimoni. That basically saying that the person who was involved with this public desecration, his name was Zimri. He was from the tribe of Shimon. So what I want to bring up and discuss is the relationship between the tribe of Shimon and the tribe of Levi, because it's very, very informative, very deep ideas here. If we go back, so we have the whole incident with Dinah being taken by force by Shechem, and afterwards it's Shimon and Levi. Here it's not the tribes, it's the individuals. This is still at the time of before there was a whole nation of Israel. And it was Shimon and Levi who gave the plan, the strategy to tell the father of Shechem, yes, Shechem can marry Dinah, but first all the males have to be circumcised. And they went along with it. They felt it was for their benefit, that they saw how successful Yaakov and his sons were, and they'd be able to take over everything because they were like a whole city. And they circumcised themselves, which was not a simple thing. These are grown men who are now circumcised. It's a whole operation. And at that point, Shimon and Levi go and they wipe out all the men of the town. So that's Shimon and Levi. Later, when Yosef is going to check on this piece of his brothers, it's Shimon and Levi that plot to kill him. And it was only that Reuben said, no, don't kill him, just throw him in a pit. And then later it was Yehuda who said, no, we shouldn't kill him. He's our brother, we'll sell him. But the original idea to take punishment out on Yosef was Shimon and Levi. Later, Yaakov, before he dies, he gives blessings to all of his sons. And Shimon is the second son, and Levi is the third. And they're in the form of blessings, but he gives them heavy rebuke. Heavy rebuke. It says, don't let my soul be within the anger of Shimon and Levi. He obviously meant to fix them. And he said, I will spread them out throughout all of Israel. And we see that Levi never got an inheritance. They got 42 cities, and that was their inheritance. They didn't have like a whole section of Eretz Yisrael. And Shimon, his portion was within the portion of Yehuda. It was somewhat autonomous, but it was actually within the portion of Yehuda. So Yaakov, in a sense, measure for measure, he doesn't give them what we would call a full blessing. So this is the history of Shimon and Levi. And here we see it is the Zimri from the tribe of Shimon who does this public sexual desecration. And it's Pinchas, who is from the tribe of Levi, who kills him. So the question is like what happened here? They seem to be on the same trajectory, the same headspace. They're on the same page, the way they saw things. But now, obviously, something changed. And we see that the real change came at Har Sinai. At Har Sinai, when Moshe said, after coming down from the mountain and seeing what had happened with the golden calf, so he says, all who are for God, come to me. And the whole tribe of Levi came to Moshe. And that was the turning point. That was the turning point that it's obvious that they were, call it zealots. They had this very, very fiery energy. But at a certain point, Shimon continued until it reached this level of Zimri. And we're told, and we can see it from the census, in this parsha, there's another census. And in the previous census, there were approximately 59,300 members of the tribe of Shimon, between the men from the age of 20 to 60. In this census, there were only 22,000. So we learn that it wasn't just Zimri involved in this orgy. It was most of the tribe of Shimon got involved. They were like, they spearheaded it. And so we see that at a certain point, Shimon and Levi parted ways. And it's just very dramatic that it's Pinchas from the tribe of Levi who kills Zimri for this public desecration. And we see that it wasn't just that he killed Zimri. The plague had killed 24,000 people. That's the end of last week's parsha. 24,000 people had died in this plague, and it was spreading. So what Pinchas did, he not only dealt with the situation, but he changed the whole energy. There is this concept in Judaism called Teva Rishon and Teva Sheni. Teva Rishon means one's initial nature, and it could be nature and nurture together. DNA, peer pressure, the way we're raised, all of that goes into our first nature. And Teva Sheni is, what do we do with it? Some people don't do anything. Some people, everyone is quite a mixture of good points and points that need rectification. Many people never really work on themselves. They accept, this is who I am. This is my nature. And that's it. Those people who are more spiritually inclined realize that our first nature is very important, but parts of it need to be improved, need to be refined, to be rectified. That's called Teva Sheni. It appears here that Shimon never really changed. They had a very fiery, zealous kind of nature. And we see in the Midrash how Zimri challenged Moshe. He had a lot of chutzpah. But Levy, at a certain point, was able to channel their natural fiery nature, their zealousness. And because of that, because of what happened at Har Sinai, they actually took over the privileges and the responsibilities of the firstborn. Throughout the Torah, the firstborn has special privileges. God takes away the privileges of the firstborn and conveys them onto the tribe of Levi. And of course, the Kohanim come from Levi. The Kohanim are not a separate tribe. They are from the tribe of Levi, but it was the specific family of Aaron that become the Kohanim. We see here an amazing gematria. In last week's parsha, we're told that Pinchas took a spear. The spear in Hebrew is called a romach. It's the only time that this word is used. So obviously it's a very special word because there are other words for a spear that could be used. Or it would be used again because spears do come up. So the meaning of romach in gematria equals 248. And from this we learn that we're told that there are 248 positive mitzvot, and there are 248 limbs to the body or bones to the body. Pinchas had to take his entire being, his body, his soul, his whole might, his heart, soul, and might in order to do what he did. Because even Moshe didn't know what to do. The elders didn't know what to do. Everyone was frozen. This was another major rebellion happening. And Pinchas reminded Moshe very respectfully what the halacha was. Moshe was so distracted that he forgot the halacha. And Pinchas reminded him. This ramach represents Pinchas taking his whole being in order to do what he had to do. It wasn't easy for Pinchas. He stood alone. That word, Romach, is 248. What's interesting is the gematria of Zimri is 247, only one away from 248. And yet, it's like a world of difference. We'd say, well, 247 is almost 248. But here we see it in gematria, but it's like a battle between Shimon and Levy, the same brothers who were together in a number of major events, and they were very zealous. But the Levim, they were able to turn their zealousness into the service of God. So that's just a beautiful allusion in the gematria. Here also we're told that what's the significance of 24,000 people dying in the plague? We're told, even though it's not explicit in the Torah, our commentaries tell us that's the exact number of people who were killed in Shechem, 24,000. And later, there are 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva who die in a plague. The Arizal puts these, call it dots, together. He connects the dots through the secret of reincarnation, and that the 24,000 men from Shechem who died, they had one merit. They circumcised themselves. And part of their souls, not their whole souls, but part of their souls were reincarnated in the 24,000 that got involved in this terrible orgy that was happening. But later, there was a semi-tikkun that they became part of the souls of Rabbi Akiva's students, but we see it still wasn't fixed. And we were learning on Shabbat that we hope that when someone is reincarnated, the idea is that the person should fix, rectify, improve whatever reasons that they were sent back to this world. But there's no guarantee because we have free will. We're given another chance. And in fact, hopefully everyone will see the numerical gems video that came out today, because we talk about Kabbalah and reincarnation. We talk about different reasons for reincarnation. So it's just very interesting. This number 24,000 appears 3 different times, and the Arizal connects them through the secret of reincarnation. Later, we see Moshe in the last portion of the Torah, Zot HaBracha. He also gives blessings to the tribes, just like Yaakov did. But here, Levi gets a beautiful, positive bracha from Moshe because they had changed. They had taken their Teva Rishon and they had refined it in their second nature, the improved version, as they say. And Shimon got no blessing. All the other tribes got blessings, but Shimon didn't get a blessing. Doesn't mean that he has no blessing in life. It's just that his nature still had to be refined. And that's why his portion of the land was within the portion of Yehuda. Yehuda were the kings. They were the leaders. And the hope was that this kind of leadership energy which is also a fiery energy. David HaMelech was a very fiery person, but it was channeled most of the time. He had his challenges, that's for sure, but he applied it to create the kingdom of Israel, to make Jerusalem the capital of Israel for all eternity. Shimon is now in the territory of Yehuda with the hope that it will affect them. It will have an influence. Just like someone who kills inadvertently, they had to go to a city of refuge. The city of refuge, there were 6 of them. They were all the cities of the Levites. The idea here also, even though they killed inadvertently, but there was still some culpability. There was some tikkun that needed to be done. By sending them to the cities of the Levites, the idea was that the energy of the Levites would influence them for the good. Okay, that is our first insight here. Later in the Parsha, there are many, many things that happen in this Parsha. One of them is that God repeats to Moshe that you will not be leading Israel into the Holy Land. And he tells him to go up on this mountaintop where he will be able to see the land. We have to remember, they're right across from Jericho at this point. They're in what we call Jordan today. And they're very, very, very close to coming into the land. We're towards the end of the book of Bamidbar. We're in the 40th year. And in a couple of parshas, we begin the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. The whole book of Deuteronomy takes place in 37 days. Here, God says to Moshe, go up on this mountain and see the land, and because you will not be leading them in. Then in chapter 27, verse 15, there's a verse here that we might just skip over and not think much of it. It says, Vayadaber Moshe el Hashem lemor. So Moshe, after God said, you will not be leading them into the land, Moshe says, Yivkod Hashem Elokei Aruchot Lokol Basar Ish al Ha'edah. He's speaking to God, saying, God, appoint God, the God of all spirits of human beings. Appoint someone to lead the congregation of Israel. Asher yetzeh lifneihem v'asher yavo lifneihem. Someone who will go out before them and who will bring them in. So what's unusual about this verse? Vayedaber Hashem el Hashem lemor. In the Chumash, the verse Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor appears 70 times throughout the Torah, and God spoke to Moshe saying. Here is the only instance in the whole Torah that takes the same kind of formula but reverses positions. Here it's Moshe speaking to God saying. This is the idea that 70 times the Yedaber Hashem Moshe lemor is an allusion to the 70 faces of the Torah. Shivim panim l'Torah. This one is an illusion that there were 70 elders, but there was the head, and the 70 elders became the Sanhedrin, the high court. But the high court had like a president of the high court. Because if you had an even number, you could have a vote of 35 to 35. And in most cases, halacha, with a large group like that, it goes by the majority. So you had to have that one extra. So here, you have the 70 times that God speaks to Moshe, and here you have the one time that Moshe speaks to God, the same formula. That's just an interesting aside. Let's now discuss who God says should be the leader. We have to remember we're in Parshat Pinchas. Pinchas just did a monumental act. We have to keep in mind that it wasn't just that he killed Zimri and Cosby and he stopped this orgy, he stopped this terrible desecration, but he also stopped the plague. And from this point on in the Torah, there are no more rebellions, no more complaints, no more disagreements. In this parsha, we do have the daughters of Tzlofchad, but they're very respectfully asking Moshe that they also want an inheritance in the land. But it wasn't in the form of a rebellion. It wasn't in the form of heavy energy. And God acquiesces and tells Moshe what the law is. What Pinchas did was monumental. One might think, Moshe says, now God, if I can't lead them in, they can't be leadership without a leader. We might think the natural pick is Pinchas. It's in Parshat Pinchas. He's just been rewarded. He's the only person who was rewarded at a covenant of peace. What better leader could you ask for? But we know that God said, Yehoshua. Let's discuss for a few minutes the energy, the dynamics that are going on here. Rashi actually says, kind of reading between the lines here, is Moshe is actually lobbying for one of his sons to take over. And God makes it very, very clear that's not how it's going to work. It doesn't work like that. And God appoints Yoshua, just like God had appointed Moshe and Aaron as the leaders. God appoints Yoshua. What's interesting is the language when Moshe says that God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, should appoint someone to be the leader. Later, when God is telling him to pick Yoshua, so that's verse 18, it says, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Kach lecha et Yehoshua bin Nun, ish asher ruach bo, v'samachta et yadecha yadcha alav. So God speaks to Moshe and says, you should take Yoshua bin Nun, a person who has spirit in them, and lay your hands on them and confer leadership upon him. This is where we get the term for ordination to this day. Rabbinic ordination is called smicha. And it comes from this verse where God says, B'samachta et yadech. Samach literally means rest your hands. Put your hands on Yoshua and confer upon him the ordination as the next leader. Here we see Moshe appeals to God, who is the God of the spirit of all flesh. And Hashem responds by saying, Yeshua, I'm picking him because he has spirit in him. So Rashi explains, what does it mean he has spirit in him? So he explains that Yeshua had the ability to be one-on-one with people and to have a spirit-to-spirit relationship, meaning he could relate to everyone. And everyone felt comfortable relating to Yoshua. We have to remember that Moshe is this awesome figure that in a certain way the people were almost afraid to approach. If you remember, when Moshe comes down from the mountain, his face is beaming with light to the point that people were afraid to look at him. And we're told that he put on a veil so that he could be approached. And here Yeshua, in a certain way, represents the opposite. He's very approachable, and everyone feels that he can understand their neshama, their spirit. But let's look, though, at the dynamic between Pinchas and Yeshua. Pinchas, actually, when he gets the covenant of peace, God says, because you were zealous for my name, you had a spirit of zealousness. And paradoxically, he's rewarded with a covenant of peace. This is a great paradox. It's not for the discussion tonight, but for those who have Orchard of Delights, there's a whole other article dealing with this paradox. How do you merit a covenant of peace through violence? And it's a very, very important idea and article. But here we're dealing with the energies of Pinchas and Yeshua. Pinchas had this fiery, zealous, Levy kind of energy, and he used it in the right time, in the right place, in the right way. Yeshua, and God describes him as the Torah describes Yeshua as that he never left the tent of Moshe. He served Moshe. He was in his presence all of the time. And from that, he became the main student. He never left his side. But we get the impression of Yeshua as being more passive, more receptive, and not a fiery kind of personality. But nothing is one-dimensional. We have to remember it was Yeshua who led the war against Amalek. And they were victorious. So Yeshua isn't a person just in the background. When he needed to be, Moshe picked Yeshua of all the people to lead a war against Amalek, our archetypal enemy. Yeshua had both components. Pinchas has this fiery energy, and yet he becomes a Kohen, and he has the chesed of a Kohen, and he has a covenant of peace. Pinchas also has both sides. When it comes to picking the leader, though, so then the question is, what is more important? What is going to be the critical factor? Here we see that God chose Yoshua. So we can learn a lot about this. Again, Yoshua also had a strong side to him. He leads Am Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. He conquers a good part of Eretz Yisrael. And yet, many people, there's a certain criticism of Yoshua that he didn't finish the job. He did not conquer all of Eretz Yisrael. Perhaps he was lacking a little bit of the fire and zealousness of Pinchas. Nonetheless, God felt it was more important in this transition period to have someone that everyone could relate to and would be willing to follow. After Pinchas killed Zimri, some people were like, who are you to kill a prince of Israel? Okay, that passed because God made it clear to everyone that Pinchas deserves a covenant of peace. When you go to the book of Yoshua, you see an amazing thing, and it says explicitly that the whole time that Yoshua is alive, the people not only followed him, but they kept the law. There was no idol worship. There were no civil wars. Yoshua was a great leader. He was a tremendous leader. So this is very interesting. One of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and we might mention it on Tuesday in the series about the Baal Shem Tov, is a concept called Zrizut b'metinut. Zrizut means alacrity, to move, to act quickly, decisively. B'metinut means with calmness, with forethought, with a plan. So the Baal Shem Tov really very, very much dealing with the same dynamics that we're trying to understand between Pinchas and Yoshua was a person needs to have both. They have to have the strength, the inspiration, the guts, the courage to act decisively, but not impulsively. There has to be thought behind it. There has to be a calmness in the decision-making process. Baal Shem Tov encouraged everyone, Zrizut b'metinut. It's a very, very important teaching. And here also we have this idea of inter-inclusion, this idea that we've talked about many times, that Pinchas really has two sides to him, and Yoshua has two sides to him. It's never one-dimensional. But here we're seeing just the interesting, we'll call it, as it were, God's thought process as to who should be the next leader. So he leans obviously towards Yoshua and feels that his relatability and his calm kind of leadership is, in the long run, what is important, because he did have alacrity. He was able to act, and he was able to fight, and he was able to conquer. But obviously God felt that that balance was the right one for that time. L'chaim, everyone. Okay, we have one more insight, and that is just a very, very interesting idea that we have here. And that is, as we read the verse, the Torah mentions the name of the prince of the tribe of Shimon and the daughter of the king. It's Zimri and Cosbi. The Midrash says something very interesting. It's Bamidbar Rabbah. It's the 21st chapter of Bamidbar Rabbah. And it says that Zimri actually had 6 names, 6 different names. In different contexts, he's called by different names. So what were they? Zimri, Ben Salu, Shaul, Ben Kananit, Shlumiel, and Ben Suri Shaddai. It's 6 different names. And then the Midrash explains the meaning behind each name. Why was he called Zimri here? It's because the word Zimri is close to the same word mutseret, which means like a rotten egg. In other words, he did a terrible thing. So here he's called Zimri. Why is he called Ben Salu? Because his action outweighed the whole rest of his family. That Sila is connected to word of outweighed. So he outweighed the goodness of his family with his terrible act. Why is he called Shaul? It's from this to borrow or to take something is the root Hishil, which is close to Shaul. So it says that he lent himself to transgression. He went after sin. Why is he called Ben Kananit? Kananit is from Canaan, the Canaanites. He said because what he did was what we might expect a Canaanite to do. And what was his real name? So the Midrash says Shlumiel. Shlumiel was his real name. So I read this Midrash this week, and my mind starts, racing and thinking of all kinds of connections. And I thought it would be a very, very good topic to bring up, because throughout the Torah, throughout the Tanakh, we see that names of people and names of places are many times symbolic. And we might never know their real names. Either it's their real name, and then later commentaries saw significance, saw symbolism of their name, or it really isn't their name. It's just that's what they're called in the Tanakh because of their actions, of who they were. What I want to do now, it's going to be relatively quickly, but it's just to give people what to think about. So the 2 that I do want to delve into, and then the rest we'll do very quickly. It says in the Midrash, the Yalkut Shimoni, that Moshe Rabbeinu had 10 names. He's referred to not necessarily in the text, but we're told that different people related to him in a different way, and they each gave him a different name. We're going to go through this relatively quickly. So we know that the name Moshe comes from Bat Paro. She's the one who named him. Mina Mai Mishitihu. I drew him from the water. We're told that Miriam gave him the name Yered. Yered means to bring down, to cause to descend. And that's because she had to go down to the Nile to watch out for him. And also others say it's because he was the one who brought the Torah down from heaven to earth, from Mount Sinai to the people. His grandfather, Kahat, called him a Vigdor, which means the master of the fence. Because when Moshe was saved by the Bat Paro, the astrologers saw something in the stars, and they saw that the future Redeemer, when he was put in the water, all they could see is like he's going to be judged through water. They saw somewhat correctly, because later he's judged for hitting the rock, and for that he couldn't go into Eretz Yisrael. So he's called the master of the fence because that stopped Paro from killing any more of the firstborn, of the young male boys. He's called Chaver because he connected the Jewish people. Chaver, it means to connect. Chaver, a friend. He connected Israel to God. And some say that his father gave him this name because, if you remember, Amram separated from his wife because they were afraid to bring any male children into the world who would be killed. And then Miriam came and said, "You're worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh only decreed on the boys. You're decreeing on the boys and girls. No more children will be born. Everyone in Israel is going to follow your lead." But then he listened to Miriam. He got back together, and that's the chibur. He became connected to his wife again. He's called Avi Socho, the father of seers, because he had Ruach HaKodesh. Called Yekutiel, because Yekutiel has the three-letter word for hope in it. He gave Israel hope. Avi Zanoach. Some say that Aaron gave him this name, that my father rejected my mother and separated from her, but because of Moshe, because of listening to Miriam and Moshe being born, they came back together again. He was called Tovia or Tuvia because it says in the text that when he was born, they saw that he was good. I saw other midrashim that one of his names was just simply Tov. Here, Tovia is the goodness of God. And they say that, what does it mean they saw he was good? That light filled the whole room. The Jewish people called him Shmaya because he would cause God to listen to the prayers of Israel. And he's called Ben Eviatar, which means the son of pardon, because Moshe was always asking pardon for the deeds of Israel. And he was also called Levi because he was from the tribe of Levi. We did that quickly, but here we just see an example of the Midrash. He's called Moshe, but he had all these other names. They're symbolic. All these names are symbolic. Now we'll do Yitro. Yitro is the father-in-law of Moshe. Even in the Torah, he is called by different names, where Moshe isn't. None of these names appear in the Torah, but in the Torah itself, sometimes Yitro is called by a different name. So what were his names? One was Chovev, from the word Chaviv, because he was very precious to God. He's like one of along with Ruth, the archetypal convert. Reuel, because it's close to the idea of Raya, which means a friend or a beloved. He was very beloved by God. He was called Chaver, which again, from Chaver, a friend, he became a friend to God. He was called Putiel because he abandoned idolatry. And he was called Kenny because he was zealous for God. He changed his whole ways. He got rid of idol worship, became a Jew, and so he that zealousness was for the service of God. But here it's interesting because a number of these names appear in the text. So if we start looking through the whole Tanakh, we see this phenomenon happening all over the place. I mentioned Ruth. Some say she was called Ruth. Ruth is Gematria 606. Reish Vav Tav. 606. And we're told because by becoming Jewish, all human beings, in a sense, are obligated with the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, even though most of the world doesn't understand that or accept that or realize that. But all of humanity is obligated by the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach. So when Ruth became a convert, she took upon herself another 606 mitzvot. So some say that's why she's called Ruth. Others say Ruth comes from the same root, same linguistic root of rivaya, which means to pour over, because her descendant is David HaMelech, and his praises of God would be like an overflowing cup. We have this expression in the 23rd Psalm. My cup runneth over. Kosi rivaya. So some people say that's why she's called Ruth. So in a certain way, we really might not know what Ruth's original name is. We just know her as Ruth. And here it seems that it's for symbolic reasons. Then we have names of places. And throughout the Chumash, we can only name a few, that places are named for what happened there. There's actually, in the Gemara, there's a discussion of different names of places between Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel were 2 great sages, and a lot of the time they had opposite opinions. So I don't remember which one. I believe it was Shmuel. Many, many times when they're talking about a place, they're trying to understand, is there a symbolic reason that this place is called this name? And many times he would just say, that's the name of the place. And Rav would say, no, it's named that because of what happened there. Meaning that either it didn't have a name before, or perhaps it had a name, but we don't know it because now we relate to it. So we see many examples, and there are really many examples throughout the whole Tanakh of this phenomenon. One is Mara. If you remember, after they crossed the Red Sea, they came to a place and the waters were bitter. So it says, so they called the place Mara. And we'll say that name stuck in the Torah. It might even probably didn't have a name before. It was in the middle of the desert. But because of what happened there, Mara is from the word bitter. Mar is bitter. Then there's Mei Meriva. This is one of the places where they had this struggle with Moshe, and they were complaining about not having water. So Mei Meriva means the waters of dissension. Another place is when Israel was wanted meat. It says they had a taiva, they had a desire for meat. And a whole incident happens there. And then it became called Kivrot HaTa'ava, the burial place of desire, because many people ended up dying there because of their rebelliousness. So here we see many examples. One of them is from last week's Parsha. Where did this orgy happen? And it says it was in a place called Shittim. So Rav and Shmuel have this disagreement. So Shmuel says, that's the name of the place. It's Shittim. That's the name of the place. Rav said, no, it was called that from the word shtuyot. Shtuyot means foolishness, craziness. And that's like an orgy. And that's why it was called Shittim, because the people just went like crazy, went nuts. And then, like I said, my whole purpose here is just kind of like to whet your appetite, because there are many, many more examples of the symbolic use of names for people and for places. And then we have the whole idea of name changes. Avram becomes Avraham. Sarai becomes Sarah. Hosea becomes Yoshua. Yaakov becomes Yisrael. Naomi, when she returns with Ruth from Moab, and she comes back to Beit Lechem, and the people say, is this Naomi? Like they were like in shock, probably because she came back destitute and many, many years later. And she said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, call me the bitter one, because God has embittered my life. Well, the truth is she embittered her own life, but she said, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara. And also we have from last week's Parsha, one of the prophecies of Bilam, when he says, I will now tell you what will happen in the end of days. And these prophecies are quoted by no less Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah. His prophecies for the end of days are considered authentic, considered real. And he says, Derach Kochav miYaakov, a star will come out of Yaakov. And so Rabbi Akiva, there was this personality, his real name was Shimon. And this is 60 years after the destruction of the temple in approximately 70 CE. This is now around 120 CE. Bar Chochma, that's the point. It says a star comes out of Yaakov, Kochav. So this personality gathered an army and they repelled the Romans from Israel. They were able to kick the Romans out of Israel and establish Jewish sovereignty again and started rebuilding Yerushalayim. And some say even they were preparing to rebuild the temple. And so Rabbi Akiva saw that he was a potential Mashiach, and he called him Bar Chochma, the son of the star. That wasn't his real name, but he called him Bar Chochma because he was hoping, at least, that he would fulfill Bilam's prophecy, because the idea of the star coming out of Yaakov, he goes on and he says basically a messianic vision. And then when Bar Chochma really failed in his leadership, not just militarily, it was more spiritually, Rabbi Akiva and the sages realized that he's not the person, he's not Mashiach. Then they called him Bar Koziba. Koziba comes from the word to be disappointed, to be frustrated, mostly to be disappointed. Here again, we see the symbolic usage of names in the Tanakh. As I said, we only touched on a few of them, but hopefully it'll give everyone food for thought. We'll end with, may we see a star come out of Yaakov, and not just a potential Mashiach, but the real thing, and lead us to a full redemption.